Hello and welcome to Decision NYC from Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm Ben Max, your host and the executive editor of Gotham Gazette. Today, we're pleased to bring you a debate in the general election for New York City Comptroller with two of the candidates who will be on the ballot. The Comptroller is the city's chief financial officer with responsibilities including monitoring the city budget, approving many city contracts, auditing city agencies, acting as a fiduciary to the city's public pension funds, and more. Voting in this race and others on the general election ballot will be done through absentee balloting, the early voting period October 23rd through October 31st, and Election Day, Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021. Along with Comptroller, also on the ballot this fall are contests for City Council, Borough President, District Attorney, Public Advocate, Mayor, and more. There are also 5 yes or no ballot questions on constitutional amendments that we discuss in a separate show and you should be ready to vote on. So with me today for this general election debate in the race for New York City Comptroller are Republican Party nominee Daby Carreras, who is also on the Save Our City ballot line, and Conservative Party nominee Paul Rodriguez. Democratic nominee Brad Lander declined to participate in this debate. But thank you both for being here. Welcome.
Thank you,
Ben.
All right, briefly, the rules for this debate are we're going to talk for about 28 minutes, and there will be opening statements of 1 minute each. At the end, there'll be closing statements of 1 minute each. And in between, I'll ask you a series of questions about the role and responsibilities of the New York City Comptroller. And each time you get a chance to answer, you'll have about 1.5 minutes. I may ask you some follow-up questions for a quick clarification or detail, and we'll move along quite swiftly here. So let's start with opening statements. We're going to start with Mr. Carreras, and the floor is yours for 1 minute.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Decision NYC. I'm not going to use a lot of the time, really, except for just explaining and exposing what's happening here now. The biggest difference between myself and any other person running for this office is that I'm actually a licensed individual. So there's more scrutiny, there's more oversight, there's more everything. So it can eliminate the corruption that's happening. Right now, we're watching as we're seeing all the different corruption happening for the big tech companies who have been censoring a lot of people. My entire job as Comptroller, being a fiduciary who I am licensed, is to get money into the city because we're not getting city money, and we've removed that entire problem of not having transparency. I'm exempt from the sanctuary city laws and statutes and ordinances that are happening because I am licensed. The only way to make money and bring money into the city instead of living on federal welfare is to bring in stimulus and bring dollars in. And sadly, progressives, the globalist leaders, are not interested in that. So again, my entire thing is about removing that pain, removing that struggle that plights my entire community and our city.
Thank you. Paul Rodriguez.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you today. And thank you, Mr. Carreras, for having the courage and gumption to show up, unlike other people. The city is facing some deep financial problems, most not seen since the 70s. The crisis did predate the pandemic, but yet the pandemic has made it worse. Elected officials have failed us, focusing on superfluous things. They're happy to sit around, kick the can down the road and wait for a federal bailout that may or may not come. I'm running because I love this city and I want to see it succeed. I believe that we can recover from the pandemic, and I want to make sure that we have processes in place so that takes maybe 2 or 3 years, or it's in the next few years as opposed to the next couple of decades. I have more than 25 years of experience in banking and finance in all aspects of it, including having the same licenses that Mr. Carreras mentioned, and more, in fact. I've also had experience working with distressed entities and industries throughout my career. I think of all the candidates here, in terms of the qualifications for the job, I do have the most relevant and requisite experience, and I'm best qualified to tackle the challenges of the city. And I'm looking forward to having a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. So as I mentioned, before we get into some of the specifics of the role of Comptroller, as I mentioned, the Democratic nominee Brad Lander declined to participate, which is obviously unfortunate. We have here nominees for Republican and Conservative parties. Very often, those two parties in the city will nominate the same candidate for various offices, obviously trying to do whatever the two parties can to try to counteract the overwhelming Democratic voter enrollment advantage, but we have a split here in this race and in others. Can both of you address that, why you were not able to win the nomination of the other party that's represented here? Mr. Carreras, how about you? Why are you not the Conservative Party nominee, but you are the Republican Party nominee?
Because I'm a moderate. I love Democrats. They're my friends. I'm against the progressives. And that's simply the reason why I'm always creating ballot lines. I created the ballot line, Stop de Blasio. I created the ballot line, Save NYCHA Now. And now I have a ballot line besides that, No Rezoning Forever, of Save Our City. So quite honestly, the independent line is the perfect place for myself, but I am the principles of the Republican Party: respect for life, respect for the Constitution, more personal responsibility, and less government.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, your answer, why are you not the Republican Party nominee here?
Two reasons. First, I did come into the race a bit late. That was one issue. The second is, it really has less to do with ideology as internal party politics. I've been involved in Republican politics many years. I'm actually a registered Republican. Back in 2004, I was the Republican Conservative Party and also a school choice party nominee for Congress way back then. But it's really more of an issue, frankly, of internal fighting within the Republican Party, which is unfortunate. I think we should have all gotten around and rallied against a single individual. But regrettably, that was not to be so. I was approached by the Conservative Party and asked, even if you did not get support from the Republican Party, would you still carry our banner? And after much thinking, I said I would, because I think the really important thing here is to highlight the problems. And it's important to get the majority party to really have to answer to the issues. What are their solutions? Unfortunately, we live in a city where basically if you have a D next to your name, you're basically nearly guaranteed to get elected, and that is unfortunate. But we want to expose and bring out those issues that need to be addressed, not simply with platitudes, but with actual plans.
Thank you. All right, I appreciate both those answers. We've seen a similar split in the mayoral race where there's different nominees for Republican and Conservative. So it's happening in various offices around the city, but wanted to get both of you on that question. So on that question, and Mr. Carreras, you got at this a little bit in your answer just now, so let's come back to you to explain this a little bit more. But for the role of city comptroller, broadly speaking, how does your ideology, your philosophy matter when it comes to this role? How you view the world and how you view politics and how you view government matter when we're talking about the role of New York City comptroller? Go ahead.
It's all about fair and balance, because you can never level the playing field. All you can do is clear the playing field. We're watching it today. We're watching it where we see large corporations, large institutions who are promoters as well as regulators. And that's the difference where I am compared to any person running for this office. I am in my office right now. I'm licensed right this very second. I manage millions of dollars, and people managing millions of dollars is the biggest difference between managing people. And you need to represent people as the comptroller and manage money. And I understand the difference. Again,
just to be clear, when you say you're licensed and you say you're managing this money, can you just be more specific? What licenses you're referring to and what money are you managing?
I'm a securities licensed individual. I'm licensed for general securities, which means I can actually bring money from the federal government into the city when we're a sanctuary city. I'm exempt from these things that preclude anybody else who has the office of comptroller to actually bring money into the city. All they can never do is have the office as a fiduciary. I'm actually a fiduciary. I'm a professional licensed money manager, and I'm the only person who could bring wealth into our city as a comptroller. That's what I do in my business, is bringing money in, as well as maintain the compliance and the audits, exactly what's necessary for this position. No other candidate can do that.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, how does your philosophy around government, around politics matter when it comes to the office of comptroller?
I think at its core, first of all, I care about people. I empathize with them. I come from humble backgrounds, and I know how hard it is to make a dollar and how important it is for the government to be spending your tax dollars wisely. But if you would allow me just backtrack a little bit on what Mr. Carreras said, I think he's been a bit misleading in terms of the licenses. Let's be very clear. I had the Series 7, I had the Series 63, I had the 65, I had the 66. I have Citibank formal credit training. I have all these qualifications, but in parts of the security licenses, all that means is that you're licensed to sell and buy and sell securities, stocks and bonds. It doesn't give you an imprint of competence, an imprint of integrity. It doesn't mean that only you have the access, are able to petition the federal government for funds. And in fact, as an elected official, you can't really rely on that license. And in many ways, at the retail brokerage level, which he works at, which I've worked at in several locations in the past, there are conflicts of interest of having someone in that position having relations with the federal government in terms of securities and in terms of bonds being issued and money. In fact, on the contrary, as a controller, you need to make sure that you and your staff keep an arm's length distance when awarding contracts, particularly anything having to do with money. So I don't know if I would necessarily, and I mean this with no disrespect, and it comes from a place of actual respect. I don't know if you'd necessarily want to keep putting that out there, because if anything, it might conflict you in terms of what you can do in the controller's office. And let's be honest, it doesn't make you any kind of financial wizard or any kind of
let's let Mr. Carreras answer.
You know,
let's let him
Sure.
respond. Just quickly.
I love the build.
Tell us quickly what your work is right now.
Oh, sure. I work right now in the nonprofit sector. I'm in the fundraising aspect of the nonprofit sector. I'd rather not say the organization just because I like to keep those things separate, but it's a major religious institution in New York City and nonprofit. We raise $20 million plus a year in funds for our main fundraiser every year. And I'm currently now in charge of all the operations and logistics related to that. Prior to that, just a couple of years back, I was a corporate banker, a stock and credit analyst, a financial advisor, a money manager, as Mr. Carreras likes to point out. So that's my background.
Your response on accreditation, how you're framing your candidacy and your resume.
Absolutely. See, the wordsmith thing is amazing, and we're going to see that a lot in this politics in the entire election. My license is exactly why I am the only person able to do this job, because I have the oversight. It's not just the political oversight.
Hold on. Don't interrupt, please. Don't interrupt.
I know. I couldn't help myself.
It's not just the political oversight, but the entire SEC, FINRA, all the different rulemaking, every single thing comes with it. My fingerprints are with the FBI. They know exactly what I'm doing. I can't do something like a Bernie Madoff or like an other individual who's been barred from the license. I'm currently licensed. I currently manage money. There's oversight all the way through. I'm the person who bridges the gap between the 99 and the 1%. I do this right now. My licenses bring me to individuals where I don't have to be precluded or have to worry about these kinds of situations where there's backdoor deals. That can never happen for myself.
Okay, let's go into something specific. I want to ask you, it relates to this conversation, and Ms. Rodriguez, feel free to take your first few seconds of this answer to say whatever you want to say. But I want to talk about the responsibilities of the controller and how you'd approach them if victorious related to the city's public pension funds is obviously a major area of debate in terms of that question I was getting at, which is philosophy of investment, including certain political, social framework into investment models, advice for the city's public pension fund boards that you have to operate with if you're the controller, how you would approach that part of the job. Mr. Rodriguez, go ahead.
Well, that's one of the major areas that I'm focusing on is the pension plans, because it is a good proxy in terms of showing the difficulties that the city's facing. We have a $250 to $300 billion pension fund, which according to the published numbers, the latest ones to come out very soon, it's about $40 to $50 billion underfunded. Now, as bad as that is, it's actually quite significantly more underfunded if we're actually speaking truthfully to the taxpayers. Right now, the city assumes that you have a compounded annual growth rate in your pension assets of about 7%, which Mr. Carreras was mentioning was Bernie Madoff type returns. What the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corp applies to that, which is the agency that has to be in charge of bailing out companies or institutions when their pension funds go belly under, they use a 3.5% rate. So if you really take that into account, our city's pension funds, frankly, are underfunded by closer to $120 to $130 billion. Just to put that into context, you could build the Freedom Tower about 30 to 35 times over with that money. And that money well surpasses the already over bloated budget of New York City. So I think the first thing in terms of beyond ideology is you have to be honest with the taxpayers. You have to let them really understand what it is, what is the liability that we're facing. And then we have to find ways to fund those pension plans more adequately.
So take 15, 20 more seconds here. What do you do about it? What's the top line headline of how you ensure that the pension funds are better funded?
Well, you have to, the main things that I'm looking to do is I want to implement performance-based budgeting throughout the city agencies. Obviously taking a few agencies every year, major agencies, and rotate them every year. Performance-based budgeting as a stepping stone to going to zero-based budgeting. What does that mean? That unlike
hold on.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that addresses the pension issue you're talking about.
It absolutely does, because
the
most salient thing is we need to find money to fund those underfunded pensions. It's not going to be from trying to maximize returns, because quite frankly, 7% is nearly impossible to achieve, and it has not been achieved thus far.
Do the pension obligations not need to be renegotiated?
Pardon me?
The pension obligations, do they not need to be renegotiated, as opposed, I mean, right now, the city is paying billions of dollars a year out of the operating budget to make up for shortfalls in the pension returns to the obligations.
The city's on the hook for that 7% guarantee. We can't just simply renegotiate our ways out of it. There's got to be legislative action behind it. And that's something that definitely has to be on the table, but it's probably not going to be the solution in the short term.
Got it. Mr. Carreras, your approach to the fiduciary aspects of this job, if you're elected, how would you approach that and the city's public pension funds?
Yeah, there was a lot there. And again,
you don't have to respond to your opponent. You can give us your...
No problem. So just to really make it concise, last year, 4.4%, 7% is with the charter. So that means $10 billion is missing. So they had to pull from that, which is ridiculous, but it should be necessary if you can fix the problem. Here's the answer. You have to bring money in. And our policies are all about removing business. It's shutting businesses down. We need to show the world that New York City is open. And by having a comptroller who can actually bring the world in and bring money in, instead of living in a welfare state where we'll have $4 billion in deficit that we have to make up with only a one-time payment, which most of this money has came in already, is ridiculous. That's why we need we need a leader here to bring dollars into our city before our city is done. That's why my party is named Save Our City. It's so poignantly messaged.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that you're saying that the way to do this is to, you say, bring money in. And I seem to identify only two ways: either bring money in through federal government or through other governmental means, or bring money in, I assume, from corporations, meaning more tax revenue.
So there's many ways to bring money in instead of just taxing more people and bring tax revenue in. The best way is to have businesses that create wealth. That's what we do here.
But our business is going to fund your pension plan?
Mr. Rodriguez,
I'm just trying to understand, forgive my ignorance, but is he saying the businesses are going to come in and fund the pension plans? Why exactly are businesses going to come in and fund the pension plans?
Businesses are going to come in and fund people to get people jobs, local jobs.
And how does the government get money from people with jobs? Through tax revenue, correct?
Tax revenue is the byproduct when you have people have local jobs. And that's
let's come to city budgeting and the roughly $100 billion annual operating budget of the city. There's limited powers that the city controller has, but there is a very important oversight function, auditing city agencies, evaluating the city budget, issuing reports, sitting on the financial control board, et cetera. How would you approach oversight of the city budget? And what do you think needs to be done, if anything, to reevaluate how the city is spending and the spending growth that the city has been undergoing? Go ahead.
Huge things about execution, huge things about having a holistic approach. There's two different jobs right there. There's the auditing and the contracts. I mean, the reason why you do audits and reports is you can find where the problems are. And sadly, our city is not even looking at this situation for 4 years out, where they just throw dollars at a problem. That just creates more corruption. Look, this is not a red issue. It's not a blue issue. That's why a moderate is here. It's a corruption issue. We need to bring money into the city. We need to have a beacon on and let people know that New York City is open for business. And there's no way you could do that from a position of nonprofit. You have to do it for a business position. It's not about profits over risk, which we're seeing right now with Facebook and the big tech companies. It's about having these things work together. We're having respect for life and bringing people up from the shadows, which is disgusting. I can't possibly think of any other way except for getting people local jobs by creating an opportunity that you can actually create. And that's what it's all about. That's what New York City is about.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, you were starting to talk about this earlier, performance-based budgeting, zero budgeting. Let's hear your outline a little more clearly on how you'd approach oversight of the city budget and city spending. Go ahead.
Yes, of course, because as you know, auditing the city agencies is not really a campaign promise, it's part of the obligation of the controller. So we need to go beyond simply auditing. And that's where it comes in. I want to implement, I'm not sure if you're aware of, familiar with Lean Six Sigma, which is a system of best practices in terms of finding out ways to make processes and the way different organizations are run more efficiently. It initially started in manufacturing. It has been applied to the service and nonprofit sector. I think we need to bring people with those expertise into the government, either train them internally or bring some around. That will allow us to identify some of the areas where we can apply better budgeting in terms of performance-based budgeting. What that means is, as opposed to what the government typically does, where, okay, my base budget for this year is whatever it was last year, and I'm either above or below, but basically, I go with whatever I had last year. That's why I started this year and I go forward. I think it's more important to identify what are your objectives? What are your goals that you're trying to accomplish? And then from there, work your way back as to what budget you would need to accomplish those goals in year 1, year 2, and so on, and have that being reviewed every year. Are we getting closer to the goal we're trying to accomplish or not? That's why it's based on performance. And eventually you want to get to a point, and it's not going to be tomorrow, but you want to get to a point where you try to implement as best as you can zero-based budgeting, where every year, every dollar needs to be accounted for and justified. Now, this is going to take everyone. As Hillary Clinton used to say, it takes a village. In this case, you did buy-in from everybody. So I believe that I have the capability of working very well, whether it's Eric Adams, Curtis Sliwa, Bill Pepitone in the mayor's office. And I'm a conservative. I'm very proud of saying that, but I love people and I get along with all sorts of people. Otherwise, I'd have a very difficult time living here in New York City. Wouldn't you think?
Question to both of you. We'll start with Mr. Carreras. The question here, digging a little bit more specifically into city agency function and city budgeting. Are there specific city agencies or entities that you'd want to most closely evaluate for audits? As Mr. Rodriguez was saying, the controller has a responsibility in the charter to audit some aspect of every city agency every 4 years, but that leaves a lot of leeway, and we've seen controllers use their priorities differently. What would your top priorities be in terms of where you'd look for evaluating agency performance, waste, abuse, et cetera? What would you look closely at?
Well, I'm going to look close at everything. In fact, here in the markets, we do this type of analysis every single quarter. So it's 4 times a year. But housing and homelessness, the entire part of education, these are huge, huge things that need special attention. There's so many outside contracts that are done that have almost no regulatory, almost no oversight for years. These things are ridiculous. Why? Because I believe that the elected leaders, these progressives, are not actually deploying either engineers to actually stimulate an audit or the capital in different places, which is wild to me because we're running this entire city absolutely backwards. The city is about business. The city is about making money for people. The city is about moving people out of poverty, about removing the struggle. The entire audit process has to be done on a regular basis. And that's how we find these problems. We can't do it once every 4 years.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
Sure, absolutely. And as I was mentioning, I would go about taking 3 or 4 major agencies and rotate them every year. Specifically, I would start with Department of Education, NYCHA, sanitation, and I think also homeless services. Department of Education, I have to tell you from my own experience, having a daughter that just entered high school, who had been in one of the specialized middle schools as a child performer, and trying to apply to the specialized high school was a nightmare. It was so completely mismanaged. Aside from the fact that this sort of, you are going remotely, you're not going remotely, there's many things that you really need to dig down and take a better look at, not just in terms of the money, but in terms of how everything is being managed. NYCHA, as we've seen, it goes without saying, all the problems they had with lead paint, with construction, the deterioration of the public housing, which is so vital to the welfare of so many in the city. And then, of course, sanitation, because I think one thing it's interesting. I went to the outside this morning and I noticed they still hadn't picked up the garbage, which they're supposed to do on Monday night. But ever since the pandemic, a lot of the city agencies, either because of lack of personnel or frankly just mismanagement by the mayor's office, haven't been running to the way they should. So I want to look at those deep down, look at processes, but also obviously find ways of making things leaner, more efficient, not necessarily, reducing headcount, because that's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to make people unemployed. We're trying to make them work better and have the city run in a much better way for the benefit of New Yorkers.
We need to move into closing statements in just 1 minute. I want to give you each a very quick short answer question, which is, there's a lot of issues around the city's contracting and ability or willingness to pay its contractors on time, especially a lot of the nonprofit human services that the city contracts with to do lots of things like running homeless services. What is one thing that you would do to improve the city's contracting processes if you were the next city controller, Mr. Carreras?
You have to streamline efficiencies. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Having accountability. I mean, when you hear some of the other candidates talk about a system of tracking dollars, it's because they're actually creating a middle ground, a middle step, because they're not doing the job that the actual statutes, that the actual charter says that you're supposed to be doing these things. So you can't go around it, and you have to have zero transparency.
Mr. Rodriguez, one thing quickly that you do to address the city's contracting process.
Well, one fairly obvious thing I would look at is looking into accounts payable, instituting accounts payable financing, whereby you can have the city pay its suppliers earlier than it might take them to do otherwise. So a lot of corporations are able to reduce the amount of the frequency which they pay their suppliers by implementing this. I'm sure with an entity the size of New York City, should be able to do something like that.
Leave that one there. Thank you. All right, closing statements. Mr. Carreras, over to you for 1 minute. Closing statement to voters. Go ahead.
Look, New York City voters, you can't be duped. We know what's been going on. We've been seeing it. It's evident when Facebook, the entire internet broke yesterday. Why? It's because there's something that people have been hiding. There's a lot of been hiding. We're all learning these secrets. Here's the biggest secret. What's happening in New York City is corruption. It's not a red issue. It's not a blue issue. It's about corruption. I aim to end crony capitalism, exactly what Occupy Wall Street was all about. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to make Wall Street work for us. We're going to have money. We're going to end the gentrification. We're going to end all of the atrocities by removing the pain and removing the struggle and bringing money and never having money being separated from people again.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, your closing statement.
Well, thank you again, Ben, and thank you, Mr. Carreras, for joining us today, for giving me this opportunity. I'm very simple. I'm a humble guy. I'm here to fight for you. I'm here to try to make life better for you, make sure that the city is in a place where we can all feel at ease and happy, hopefully before I retire in 20 years or less. I'm going to be straight with you. I'm gonna speak bluntly. I'm not gonna wordsmith you as I was accused of. So I'm not gonna use the term money manager if I'm not, or investment banker if I'm not. I'm gonna be very direct with you and tell you the truth of what's happening in the city and what we can or cannot do. I am also not gonna promise you the stars. I'm gonna tell you what's doable, but I will continually seek to find new ways of approaching the same old problems that we've had to face. And thank you so much.
And thank you. I appreciate both of you being here today and participating in this debate. Two of our candidates for New York City Comptroller on the general election ballot. And thank you for watching Decision NYC election coverage from Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I hope this debate and others that we're hosting are helpful to you as you make your choices and get ready to vote in the fall general election here in 2021. A number of important decisions are on the ballot. I'm Ben Max. See you next time.